When Crisis ended in 1986, it had lived up to its promise. Worlds lived, worlds died, and the DCU was never the same. And soon, neither was Superman. Across the Man of Steel miniseries and a subsequent 2-year run on the main titles, writer-artist John Byrne revamped Superman for the post-Crisis era. Earth was Superman's primary influence. Kal-El was the sole survivor of a cold, sterile Krypton. Clark was never Superboy, but did dominate the football field. The Kents lived, and Lois Lane and Lex Luthor were reborn to meet the moment of the late 1980s. These changes have been debated for years. Now, in a new Digging for Kryptonite epic, we're revisiting the Byrne era one more time on the verge of its 40th anniversary and evaluating its ultimate impact on the Superman mythology and our fandom. Welcome to Digging for Kryptonite, a Superman fan journey. I'm your host, Anthony Desiato. Joining me to discuss the first year of the John Byrne era in the main super titles is veteran Superman podcaster and returning guest, Michael Bailey. Welcome back. It's always an honor to have you here. I always love comparing notes with you. Thank you.
I really appreciate you asking me to be on this, because just as Digging for Kryptonite is your fan journey, and in the early days, you had that very kind of television series-esque introduction of walking through the doors of whatever comic shop and seeing the death of Superman. We are going back to my genesis point of collecting the titles. So I am always down to talk about the Byrne stuff. It is amazing how much my opinions have shifted, even since doing From Crisis to Crisis and covering these back in like 2009, 2010. So
yeah, it is always a journey. And yes, you did cover these issues that we're going to talk about now. Way back at the beginning of your podcast, you employed a month-by-month approach, correct?
Yes. It was proper for the time. I would not do that ever again. I would definitely adopt more of what you do with your stuff. I would probably still go chronological, but I wouldn't do, like, we're going to cover the January 1987 books in this episode, because that really bites you in the ass when you get to 5 titles.
As far as what we're here to talk about in this episode, we're talking about comics published from late 86 through 87. Superman 1 through 11, written and drawn by John Byrne. I would say this is sort of the flagship book of the Man of Steel era. We also have Action Comics 584 through 593, also written and drawn by John Byrne. And this was the team-up book. This is where we got to see Byrne's Superman interacting with the post-crisis iterations of various heroes of the DC universe. And then we have Adventures of Superman, numbers 424 through 435, written by Marv Wolfman and drawn by Jerry Ordway. And this was sort of the street-level approach to the proceedings. And I would argue, I suspect you will agree, the closest forerunner to what we would ultimately get in the Triangle era as far as style of storytelling. Yes?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. Also, the closest to the George Reeves series, which is so foundational to all the people that are working on these books. The DNA, and then you could, I'm fascinated that you have covered basically you haven't released all the episodes, but you have watched all of the episodes of that show. It must be interesting now coming back to this and seeing all the DNA from that show in these comics.
Yeah, I mean, right down to the title. The fact that they took the then existing Superman title and rechristened it The Adventures of Superman in honor of the 1950s television series, because of course we would get the new Superman series, which started with number 1. So essentially everything that we are talking about, it's what is collected in the first and second volumes of the 4-volume hardcover set that DC put out a while back that I have on my shelf. That's what I have been working off of. Lots to cover. I have questions for you. I'm really excited. But maybe to sort of launch us here, I'm curious, because this points to, I think, what we'll get into as far as what each of these books was doing. But how did you read these issues? How did you reread them? Because there are different ways you can do it. You can go title by title. you can go by publication order, or you can go by what I guess we could call reading order, which is the way the hardcovers map them out, where if there were 2 issues of Superman that essentially were a 2-parter, those would be placed together. They would break the publishing order so that you got that 2-part story together.
Yeah.
So how did you read these?
On this most recent one, it was through those 2 hardcovers. I have both the physical copies and I have digital copies through Comixology, because they were dirt cheap at one point. It just seemed stupid not to get them. Originally I read them as they came out, starting with issue 8 of Superman and 591 of Action Comics. So that was literally getting it off the newsstand at like the Super Fresh or the Walden Books or 7-Eleven. It's really weird that I can tell you where I bought certain books, because it was just so foundational to everything that would come later. When I've gone through rereads in the past, I usually go chronological. So all the January books, all the February books, etc. But just for ease of, and I figured it was what you were doing. I think you mentioned it to me. You might have. I just did it the way you did it for this, so that we'd be kind of on the same page of how we reread this stuff. Because I can't tell you how many times I've read these comics over my lifetime.
No, I can imagine. No, the reason I ask is because this is not the first time we've covered these issues on the podcast. But when we did those episodes back in 2021, I split it. So we did one episode on the Superman title, and then we did another episode comprised of 2 segments, one on the action issues and one on the adventures issues. And it worked out that way based on guests and who was interested in doing what. And I've always been curious to go back to that material for myself and for the podcast, and to follow that reading order, which again is very close to the publication order as laid out in those hardcovers, and see if it made any difference. And I'll be perfectly honest, for me, it really didn't. I know, this wasn't yet that triangle era, or even the proto triangle era mode of storytelling, where there was a lot of coordination and one thread would lead into another in one of the other titles. There are a few instances of that here and there. For example, I think it's the first or second issue of Action Comics in the post-crisis era, and we see Lex make the connection that there's something between Clark Kent and Superman. And then that leads us right into Superman #2, the iconic cover of Lex with the giant computer screen and Clark Kent as Superman and all of that. So there are little things like that here and there, but for the most part, it really felt like the books were really on their own tracks, doing their own thing. I'm curious what you found.
Yeah, it's, when I first read them, they were all of a piece because I didn't know any better. I was just like, these are all Superman books. When we covered them on From Crisis to Crisis, I always felt that these were the lead up to the Triangle era, but not really the Triangle era. So it's one of those things where, looking at the reading order they have in this hardcovers, I actually really I think for somebody coming into this era, it's the best way to do it. Because it is more of a narrative. Whoever put these together did a really good job of keeping storylines together, because, Marv Wolfman was really doing his own thing in Adventures of Superman. And Action would touch on things like, if you read Adventures of Superman number 424, you see Clark Kent getting the phone call that leads into Action Comics number 584. That's not a huge deal, though. But going from that issue of Action where you see Lex at the end and then going into Superman #2, that's actually a better way to read it. And it's funny because Superman was rare at the time. I think it was one of the few characters, I think it was only like Spider-Man, that had like 3 titles. And the Spider-Man books did not really connect in any kind of meaningful way. They had things that overlapped, but from what I understand of talking to people from that time period, every book had its own flavor. And I think they kind of stuck with that with these. Every book has its own flavor, so you don't, outside of Action 591 or the Legends crossover, you really don't have to read the other titles to understand what's going on in that book. And this was the height of the newsstand era. So, not the height. I misspoke on that. it was when newsstand was still the primary distribution of Superman books. If you talk to Jerry Ordway, he will tell you up until the death, like they had more newsstand sales than comic book store sales. So there was that too. Now these books that we're talking about today, of course, sold a lot better because it was a number one and it was the dawn of that era. But I think when you get deeper into it, it starts to be more episodic because with subplots carrying over because they just didn't know if the people reading the books were going to be able to get all of them. So, I mean, I was lucky. I had a lot of spinner racks to choose from.
Gotcha. But yeah, I do want to tip my hat to whoever was in charge of those hardcovers, that 4-volume set. The mapping is very good. And I would say that if you are really looking to immerse yourself in the Byrne era on the main titles, that is generally what I would recommend. If you're not looking to make quite that level of commitment in terms of time or money, and you really want to zero in, as we talk through the various stories and titles, you might find that one of them is more appealing to you than the other. And I wouldn't discourage you from picking one, but if you are going to go through them all, I think those hardcovers are an effective way to do it. So when we did our episodes back in 2021, that was, and it's still crazy to me that this was the case, but that was the first time that I was reading the entire Byrne era from start to finish. I had owned and read select issues from this period of time from my youth, digging through back issue bins. I had Adventures 424. I had Superman #1. I had the Supergirl saga, basically the beginning and the end, maybe a couple of other issues sprinkled in. So I had a little bit of exposure, but not a lot. And then we did those episodes. I went through everything. Now I'm going through it again. But I want to toss the ball to you. Tell me more about that experience with Superman #8 and Action 591, because that is right smack in the middle of that greatest hero of them all crossover with the Legion, all the business with the Pocket Universe Superboy. Just take me to that moment and what impact it had on you.
So the prologue to that was I have 3 older sisters and we all had to get braces. If you go from my oldest sister to me, the youngest, it was like a sliding scale of jacked up grills. I had the worst. Like it was like God had not only given me an overbite, but an overbite that stuck out a little bit. So it was like daring people to chip my teeth, which did eventually happen, much to my mother's chagrin. But I was 10 or 11. I wasn't old enough to get it, but I still had to go to the appointments because despite what you hear about Gen X, we weren't all like tossed a house key and a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and told to fend for ourselves. I couldn't be home alone. And Dr. Ty's office was like the toy area. It was lousy with comics. I mean, it was just full of Batman and Superman books. He had been subscribing for years. And I'm assuming, just thinking back to it. And I would like poke through Superman books. But it was that Sunday morning. We were about to go to church, but we had to stop by and get something at the Superfresh, and I saw Superman #8 on the spinner rack, and I walked over to it, and it's a very dramatic cover that I would eventually discover later is not only an homage to Fantastic Four #249, but if you look at the choices of the members of the Legion of Superheroes that are on that cover, you have a fire character, a character that turns invisible, a Rocky character, and a really smart guy. Thank you, Adam Mallinger, for calling me out on that on From Crisis to Crisis like a decade ago. He gave me crap about that in a very friendly way. But I remember opening I saw the cover and I open it up, and this is going to sound weird in the world that we live in now, post Henry Cavill Superman, but seeing Superman with a hairy chest was weird. And not only is it Clark Kent with a hairy chest, wearing his glasses, ripping a tree out of the ground, but Lana Lang is sitting on the fence behind him. Now, my only Superman comics at this point was Superman from the 30s or the 70s. But even in that limited reading, I knew Lana Lang was not supposed to know that Clark Kent was Superman. So I'm like, what is this? And I'm flipping through, and then Mom and Pa Kent rock up with a picnic basket. And I'm like, wait a second. There's supposed to be, something's going on here. So I got that, and Action 591 was on the same spinner rack. So I decided I needed an allowance, and those were my introduction to Byrne's Superman. And it's weird now to think about it, because not only is it like the middle of a storyline that I would not read the first and last part of until 10 years later in the summer of 1997 when I bought those Legion issues, but it's introducing me to Superboy, the Legion of Superheroes, and none of those are a thing anymore. And somehow I read those two books and went, I want to go back for more. I have no idea what 11-year-old Mike was thinking. He just liked what he saw and he wanted to read more Superman.
Now, as far as what we're going to talk about in this episode, we're not going to go issue by issue or anything like that. These episodes are long enough as they are, but we'll talk about themes and broad strokes and the plot points and character moments that really stood out to us. But just to give people a little bit of a flavor of these titles, just to give a quick rundown. For example, we mentioned Action Comics as this team-up book. So we have team-ups with the Teen Titans, the Phantom Stranger, Etrigan, the Hawks, the Green Lantern Corps, the Metal Men, and Big Barda in, yes, that controversial two-part story, which we'll talk about. And then over in the main Superman title, we have the post-crisis introductions of Metallo and Mxyzptlk. We have a face-off with Joker. We have a couple of, I think, iconic Lex-centric stories that really encapsulate the Byrne post-crisis iteration of the character. We have an issue with Bloodsport. We have a two-parter with the Host, this ancient alien race that possesses people. We have the introduction of Rampage. We have an issue where Lex manipulates Superman's powers. And of course, as we've been mentioning, we do have tie-ins with the Legends crossover, as well as that crossover with the Legion of Superheroes, which tried to square away this post-crisis universe where Clark was never Superboy with the classic Legion of Superheroes continuity where Superboy was a member and the inspiration. And then over on the Adventures of Superman front, we have the introductions of Cat Grant, Emil Hamilton, Jose Delgado. We have all of this business with the gangs of Metropolis. And in, I think, an interesting precursor to the most recent movie, we have Superman inserting himself into a geopolitical conflict and invading the foreign nation of Karak. So we'll talk about all of that, but big picture, those are sort of the broad strokes of those books. I guess on that note, I'm just curious, like, how do these land for you now after all of this time and your multiple revisitations? How do you feel about these?
The thing that I keep coming back to is, and I know you've already done an episode on Man of Steel, and there was a point, and I'm just going to say this to kind of set up my next statement, is that I used to look at Man of Steel as the Bible. Like, this is Superman. This is his introduction. This is what sets him up. And because we're now next year going to be 40 years out from that, and we've had 15 billion reinventions and new origins, etc., and new versions and new takes on the character, there's now more of a basis of comparison. And so there are a lot of decisions Byrne made in those books that I kind of disagree with now on a kind of a philosophical level. But what I say to that, in spite of that, I guess I should say, with that and with these issues, this is exactly what Superman needed at this time. If you read the issues of Superman and Action Comics and DC Comics Presents that led up to the Crisis on Infinite Earths and led up to these issues, the last 2 years of the pre-Crisis Superman, hit and miss is being really kind. It's not like they were all terrible. There was just nothing there to grab you as especially a new reader who would be coming in because of the Crisis and such. There's a couple really good stories in there, but mostly it's just kind of the same thing. And some of them were inventory issues that Julius Schwartz was kicking out because he was walking out the door. When you look at what was popular in comics in the early 80s up to 1986, it was New Teen Titans. It was the Legion of Superheroes. It was the X-Men. It was Roger Stern on Avengers. It was John Byrne on Fantastic Four. Those were the books that people were talking about. And so to bring John Byrne over to Superman and to, crucially, bring that Marvel Comics style of storytelling that Marv Wolfman and Jerry Conway had brought in before Byrne came through the door, and that Byrne carried over as well. What it did was create a serialized version of this character that you can really sink your teeth into as a reader, on top of the fact that Byrne completely revolutionized how Superman looked on the page. I don't think we give Byrne enough credit for the visual representation of Superman that we have seen. I think him and Dan Jurgens kind of set a standard that artists are still keying off of to a certain extent. He made Superman bigger. He made him more dynamic. He draws some of the best flying Superman on the face of the planet. So it's a really weird, I have like two thoughts always in my head at the same time. Oh man, I don't really like this, but you got to remember this is exactly what this character needed at the time. And it lays all of the foundation for the Triangle era that came after it. So it's complicated, but the things that I don't like about it or that I have nitpicks about are true nitpickery. It's not like a systemic problem with the books.
Okay, fair. I think generally, especially if we're really zeroing in on just the reboot itself and the Man of Steel of it all, but even extending it to these issues, I think we're generally aligned. Now, you haven't heard my episode on Man of Steel yet, but I kind of laid out my revised thesis on Byrne, and it tracks largely with what you just kind of laid out, in that for me, I'm always going to have gratitude for what Byrne did, because it gave rise to the Superman I met and fell in love with. I do think that there was a lot that was an overcorrection in terms of elements of the mythology and the characterization, but exactly to your point, and this is what I said a couple of weeks ago, that even if it was an overcorrection, it was a necessary one to ultimately achieve what I think is an equilibrium where we are now. And so I think this was sort of a necessary stress test to put the Superman characters and mythology through at the time. So that's kind of where I've landed overall. I guess as far as these issues in particular, I enjoyed the reading project. I did, honestly. I had fun with the homework. They were certainly not a slog to get through. It was a fair amount of reading. And, as always, I appreciate you doing the homework. And I, as always, procrastinated more than I intended to. So it ended up being a lot of reading in a concentrated amount of time. But I did enjoy the reading project. And to your point, the art is great and clean and dynamic. And the Bloodsport issue in particular, where they're facing off, I just really liked the way that all played out. Byrne plays with time a little bit in one of the issues with the Host, where it's not like all the setup for the fight and then the fight. We're cutting back and forth and jumping around in time throughout the issue. That was really cool. Despite the fact that we are approaching 40 years, there is still a freshness and an energy to the issues that I think really did make for an engaging read. So I enjoy the issues at the same time. And this is basically what I said a few years ago. It holds true, which is I definitely got the most out of the Wolfman Ordway Adventures of Superman issues. Throughout all three titles, or across all three titles, there's a lot of talk about Superman's new power level in the post-crisis universe. They really do make the point that he's sweating more. It's harder for him to lift things. He gets tired. He's not sure if he's going to survive a blast. Across all the books, there's a lot of talk about that, and that's fine. That's all well and good. But what I felt like Wolfman and Ordway were doing that resonated with me, that I would have loved to have seen more of in the other books, was more of that mining of the personal struggle. Like, there's a great issue where Superman's kind of running himself ragged, and Clark Kent is missing deadlines. He's missing these assignments. Perry's not pleased, as you would expect. Superman's losing battles. And he ends up missing Ma and Pa's anniversary party. And there's this great moment. And I know I talked about this the last time we did it, because I'm sure I did. I had to have, because it's the sort of thing that just instantly grabs me. But there's this great moment where Pa takes Clark outside to have a heart-to-heart with him. And Clark's like, I feel like there's a war between the legend and the man. And I can't be two people. And the Clark side of me is losing out. And Jonathan's like, you're just one man. And sometimes the Clark side is going to take priority, and sometimes the Superman side is going to take priority. But you're just one man. You're doing the best you can. Great. There's another issue where Clark is in the early days of an entanglement of sorts with Cat Grant, and as Superman inserts himself into her battle for custody of Adam, and he questions himself about whether or not this was an appropriate step for Superman to take. And then the last example I'll cite is when he does intervene in the country of Karak. It's interesting because I feel like I saw people citing this after the James Gunn movie came out. And yes, I do certainly see parallels, but it's completely flipped, right? In the new movie, Superman is very clear of purpose. It's the people around him who are like, maybe you shouldn't have done this. Whereas in these issues, it's Superman who's not sure if this is what he should be doing. And he talks about how he's made it a point to not impose his will, his way of thinking, his values on other people. This is an overstep in terms of how he's typically conducted himself, but he takes this step given the circumstances, and the world responds very well to him. So it's a bit of a flip on that, but all to say, like, those instances really jumped out at me as I think really getting into that inner struggle, right? And I just would have loved to have seen a bit more of that in the other books. I just felt like adventures between that and it's building out of the supporting cast with Kat and Jose and Jerry White just felt like it was about something in a deeper way than the other books, which, while fun and fresh and engaging and all of that, didn't feel like there was as much meat on the bone. While it was laying that foundation, it just didn't feel like there was as much for me to sink my teeth into. That's kind of my overall assessment.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. Wolfman's and Ordway's Adventures of Superman is very formative for me in how I like Superman stories. It's why these are the stories that are the reason why I don't go to All-Star Superman style stories as like my go-to Superman stories. I like the supporting cast. I like Superman being the most fantastical part of his world. It's why when they did the whole City of Tomorrow thing, I had a really kind of miserable couple of years of reading. But the coming in with the gang war story as I did, the second part of that is a tragedy in 5 acts. And it's from the perspective of Jimmy and Lois and Perry, and you really get into everyone's personal life. And as I just remember, that was one of the things that attracted me to these books, is like, oh, I like these characters. There's kind of an interesting thing going on here. Like, Perry is dealing with the fact that his son is part of a criminal enterprise, and Lois really wants to do the story, and Lois is pushing back. It's like, no, this is what you taught me to do. This is who I am as a reporter. And Jimmy being, man of action in a convenience store holdup and all that. It's just so good. The only issue I have with those is that, and Ordway has said this, is that they didn't know where the circle thing was going to go. So if that feels like it's really weird, it's because there was never like a plan with that. And it's the only like downside to the entire those 12 issues, is that the circle storyline is where I just lose all interest. But Clark going home in Adventures 430 and missing his parents thing, it's just like, and having when I was looking at it and reading it post James Gunn movie, I'm like, okay, yeah, this feels like this all tracks. This is, you can kind of see Pruitt Taylor Vince saying these lines in that kind of stilted way he had of speaking. And I love the Cat Grant stuff, because Byrne dealt with Cat Grant and then he did really weird things with her, which you'll be talking in the second year. Things that again, other writers had to kind of clean up to a large extent. But I like the introduction of this character that is just really into Clark, that really likes Clark, not really caring about Superman. And we will probably talk about Byrne's Lois a little bit, but in rereading these, I'm like, God, she is so much better for him than the Lois of this era in every way humanly possible.
Yeah, dude, 100%. No, I agree. I agree about the circle. So they're this ancient race who think that Superman is one of them, this lost member who had gone off and is return has been foretold. And one of the members literally kills himself in the process of trying to enter Superman's mind. And then they sort of fade for a while. They come back in Wolfman's last issue, because what we're talking about here is the total of Wolfman's tenure on Adventures of Superman. And then Byrne will take over as the co-plotter and writer, and we'll talk about his issues next time. But yeah, they do wrap it up in Wolfman's last issue, which is actually kind of a funny payoff, where Superman finally has his face-to-face with the Circle, and they finally come to terms with the idea that, okay, Superman's not this long-lost member of our tribe, but they still need his help to leave Earth. And he's like, you guys could have asked. Like, I wish you had just asked.
It's something years later Dan Jurgens would play with a lot. There's a really funny story during the early dating days of Lois and Clark's Adventures of Superman issue, where Siphon and Dreadnought reveal that they're part of this alien race that just wants to leave, and he literally says to them, "You could have just asked. We didn't have to go through all of this just to have that happen."
Yeah, but no, overall, I agree. I think that one was a non-starter. I'm not shocked to hear that they really didn't have a master plan for that. Mm-hmm. That is, yes, I would say the one aspect of the Adventures of Superman run where I'm just like, what are we doing here? It feels like an outlier given how grounded and personal the rest of the stories are. And we're dealing with these geopolitics and then the gang situation. So it felt like an outlier. And so that tracks.
And it's to get a little inside baseball, Wolfman has been very much on record that during this period of time, he was suffering writer's block. And I know from talking to Jerry Ordway on numerous occasions that it was kind of a frustrating experience for him, because Wolfman was suffering from this block, but he wouldn't let Ordway help him plot because there was a credits situation thing going on there. So I know to a certain extent that it was kind of a frustrating time for both men, but still you don't see that on the page. There's not like it's still very captivating. That cover to 435, by the way, is an homage to an Iron Man cover from the 70s. I was surprised to find out how many homages are in the covers to these books that we're talking about. But no, it's one of those things where when you look at like the geopolitical situation of the mid 1980s, where terrorism was a thing, not like it would be in like the early 2000s, obviously, but terrorism in the Middle East and all of these things were all in the news. And the idea that you have this kind of rogue element attacking Metropolis in the first two issues of Wolfman's run, and then the whole Professor Hamilton of it all, and boy, I'm glad that they saved that character, because he has it's like his beginning and his end are just weird. But you have that as the setup to like 428 when he does go and attacks Quarak and has the whole experience over there. And you're right, like in the movie that we saw a couple months ago, or that you can watch now on HBO Max, him making that decision is largely a negative with everybody, and Lex Luthor uses that to kind of spin against him. But in the mid 80s, with Reagan as president, oh yeah, it was rah-rah all the way in the books because of it. And that it's like looking at that particular snapshot in history, everything tracks with how Wolfman played with it.
Yeah, truth, justice, and the American way, baby. Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. But like I said, it was striking, and especially in light of the movie. But to see the way in which it was flipped, it's like, yes, in the broadest of strokes, we have Superman inserting himself into another country and intervening in a way he typically doesn't. But yeah, in terms of where the conflict is coming from, it's completely inverted, which was very interesting to me. Yeah, I mean, look, like I said from the start, the Wolfman Ordway issues, and unsurprisingly, given that Ordway would continue on into the Triangle era, felt the most like that period of Superman comics, which obviously means a lot to both of us. So it's probably not a surprise that I gravitated most to the Wolfman Ordway issues. Like, I don't think anyone would be shocked to hear me say that. But like I said, it was really the fact that we got into more of that internal struggle that really, really came across. And like I said, for all the talk about how Superman's powers are more modest in this era, and I'm all for that, by the way. And, we've seen that in other media as well. Superman, the animated series is another great example of that. I'm all for Superman's powers being scaled down. And I think that kind of opens up what you could do in terms of the physical threats. But I still think what we see in Adventures is the more interesting kind of challenge where, what does he do about gang violence? What does he do when the son of Perry White is making bad choices, right? And it's not about how hard he can hit or get hit, to quote, go back to Rocky. It's not.
I was about to say, are we going to do the whole speech?
but it's not about that, right? It's about more this battle for the soul of this young man and for the people specifically in the suicide slum area. So I just felt like it was a more interesting kind of challenge. At the same time, look, maybe it was for the best. We had these 3 distinct titles, each kind of in their own lane, doing their own thing. And you got those different flavors and maybe they came together to make a perfect blend, but it was just that those Adventures issues, to me, each time I hit one of those I was like, all right, like there's going to be little something here.
Yeah. And also in how Wolfman treated Lex Luthor. Lex Luthor was more Metropolis centric. His ends of this, of the story, especially during the gang war storyline, were more about his criminal enterprises in the city. Whereas in the Byrne issues, it was more big picture stuff and more out and out, like manipulative evil stuff. But it's just like in gang war, he's basically trying to consolidate all the gangs under his own umbrella. Like he's a kingpin, one would say. But in the Superman issues, it was more like, creating something called Clash. But they don't feel like they're different characters. They just feel like they're different elements of the same character. We're just getting to see this side of Lex in Adventures of Superman and another side of Lex in the regular title, or not the regular title, the adjectiveless title, I guess I should say. And that's why when you read everything, it does feel of a piece. It does feel of a particular era, even though in that first year you do have two creative voices kind of operating at the same time. And it's really weird. Depends on what version of the history you read. But I have an Amazing Heroes article from 1986 where Wolfman is basically saying, I'm the one that brought Byrne into this, basically, or suggested Byrne, and I knew that was cutting my own creative throat. And so it seems like a lot of the initial work was all Wolfman, and then Byrne comes in and the trajectory changes because of his personality. So it's so strange to know all that, because sometimes you read about like backroom stuff and behind the scenes stuff, and you can kind of see it on the page. Like I said before, you can't see any of that here. It's just all really engaging comics.
My love of the TV series Smallville is well documented, and there's one Smallville podcast that's always at the top of my queue. Always Hold On to Smallville, hosted by our pal, Zach Moore. Zach and his guests bring tremendous insight, passion, and humor to each and every episode, and the podcast continues with more great Smallville and Superman talk now that their series rewatch has concluded. Listen wherever you get podcasts, and keep an eye out for the other shows under the Always Hold On To banner. We all love the big budget superhero films, but the world of independent cinema remains a place of creative freedom and entrepreneurial spirit. Whether you're an independent filmmaker yourself or you just love movies, don't miss these New Jersey festivals: Brightside Tavern in Jersey City, Hang On to Your Shorts in Asbury Park, and Round Reel in Bloomfield. And now they're joined by the Shorts and Stout Film Festival in Long Beach, New York. Event details, as well as submission information for filmmakers, can be found at filmfreeway.com. Fat Moose Comics, established in 1982, is New Jersey's best and oldest comic book store. Led by current owner Sean Hendricks, Moose has that rare, old-school comic shop feel and camaraderie, yet also remains a welcoming space for new fans. If you're looking for something and they don't have it, they can probably get it for you. They know a guy. Visit Fat Moose in Whippany the next time you are in the Garden State, and be sure to reach out via the Fat Moose Comics Facebook page. Aw Yeah Comics celebrates everything that is wonderful about comics, toys, artwork, and the joy they bring to people. Visit them in person at one of their 3 locations: Harrison, New York, Muncie, Indiana, or Skokie, Illinois, home to our pal, Sweet Sweet Byrne. If you have children and have been looking for a family-friendly store, look no further. Join Aw Yeah for exciting events, including creator signings, how-tos, and more. Visit awyeahcomics.com and follow them on social media. Their name says exactly how they feel about it. Say it with me now. Aw yeah. Agreed. I quoted from that Amazing Heroes article a couple of episodes ago. And when I talked to Mike Carlin, he described the situation between Byrne and Wolfman as the months wore on as a Cold War. Mm-hmm. And he didn't elaborate and I didn't press, but I'm just curious because you've been at this longer than I have. You've investigated. I'm curious if there's anything specific that you know of that's known that you could share.
The only thing I have from behind the scenes is from Ordway. And and the stuff that I can reveal, because as I joke a lot, the first time Jeff and I spoke to Jerry Ordway, it was a 6-hour conversation. 2 hours of that ended up in the show. 4 hours of that was just him telling us stuff that he should not have been telling two guys that he just met.
Gotcha. Yeah. Was it being recorded or was it off?
I have that file.
Gotcha. Okay.
And a lot of stuff is stuff you've heard in subsequent interviews we've had with him as well. It just wasn't a good time for Wolfman just in general. So I can see that there would have been a Cold War because you have Marv Wolfman, who was the hotshot writer at DC in the early to mid 80s. I mean, New Teen Titans was their most popular title. He writes Crisis on Infinite Earths, which is the reality shaking event of, everything in DC from the last 50 years led up to that event. And then you have John Byrne, who's the hotshot over at Marvel, has a complete falling out with Jim Shooter and comes over to DC full time because his original intention was he was going to do the Hulk and Superman. And then he just eventually said F you to Marvel and just came over full time. And I can see where when you have people that are very large fish in a very small pond, it's kind of, we have to also remember that comics, seem like a huge thing now, and it seemed like a huge thing back in the 80s, but it was a very small insular community of people working in it. So I can totally see that they both had visions of what they wanted to do with this character that were at constant odds with each other. And I can honestly see them seeing what the other was doing and just being like, no, I'm going to try to counteract that in a weird way.
Gotcha. It is, but I agree with you that while, even if you didn't have the cover page and you were just reading these issues, you would know which title you were in. Mm-hmm. Yet the characterization was consistent. And
yes,
Lex is a great example of that. In Wolfman and Ordway's first issue, there's this business about how Lois and Lucy's mother was caught in this chemical plant accident and is suffering. And of course, Lex emerges with this treatment that needs to be administered on a monthly basis. He was shocked to learn that it was one of his subsidiaries where she suffered this accident. But then, of course, we find out at the end, but this is all a manipulation. He was responsible for the accident. He could cure this affliction with one treatment, but he's going to prolong it to ingratiate himself to Lois and serve as that reminder that she needed to rely on him to save her mother. And that is very much in line with the Lex we will see in the Byrne issues, I suppose most notably in that 900 Miles to Metropolis backup story, where he makes the indecent proposal to waitress Jenny Hubbard just to toy with her. And it's very clear this is something he engages in regularly. I'm on record. This is not my preferred version of Lex Luthor. I understand the appeal, and I definitely see how these stories definitely capture that. I think they're effective in presenting this version. But yeah, it definitely feels like the same Lex across these stories, which is a positive. It feels like the same Lois, unfortunately. I mean, you were alluding to this earlier. What was the deal with this, man? Because I talked about this, I guess, in our Man of Steel episode, because I went through, as part of my research, I was going through a lot of the Byrne forum posts that he's made talking about Superman over the years. And so one of the things that he had posted about was how he had wanted Lana to be the primary romantic interest, and that didn't fly. I don't know why then we had to land on such a cold, abrasive Lois, but it's kind of a tough pill to swallow with that character.
Yeah, Lois is a very tough character to write. I don't envy anybody that has to write that character because you're supposed and it goes into. I mean, if we really wanted to get deep into this, we can go into the systemic misogyny that exists in society back then and today. But acknowledging all of that, my ideal Lois is somebody that is tough as nails, that goes for the story, that has principles that she stands on, but is still not a terrible person to be around. And, I thought Rachel Brosnahan's Lois was a perfect example of that. This Lois is much like the Lois of early Terry Hatcher and Lois and Clark, is just somebody that does things and you're like, why are you so mean? Why are you so cold? Why, like, and I get, especially later, Superman does himself no favors with her. And Jonathan Kent doesn't help matters either. I almost chose those issues just to talk about that, but I wanted to stick with these. So when you look at Clark in Man of Steel #6, he's just like, when I get back to Metropolis, I'm going to try to get with that girl. And I'm like, why? Why? She has been awful to you since you started because she thinks you stole her story. She's held this grudge. And then you see her kind of, like the whole relationship that forms in these issues with Jose Delgado and her kind of making a play for Clark. But then she shows up at his apartment in Superman #11 and Cat Grant's there making dinner. And it's not as bad in this first year because honestly, in Byrne's issues, you don't see a whole lot of Lois doing stuff. It's really that second year where it gets a little muddier. So like her in Superman #1's fine, but even then she's just like, well, I guess I took pity on you to go jogging with you. Well, aren't you magnanimous, Lois?
Yeah.
I've never understood writers who are convinced that Lana is endgame for Clark. I've never in my life been in that position where I was just like, yeah, let's go with Lana. Because it's just like you just suffered through the Austin issues. So
listen, I have an audience member who's going to write us an email and I'm going to let you respond. Well, when that comes
Lorenzo. Yeah. I'll talk to Lorenzo Hot Takes Valdez. I have no problem.
Shout out to Lorenzo. No, well, listen, the only thing I have to take great umbrage at when you talk about Terry Hatcher's Lois. Terry Hatcher's Lois on her worst day is 1,000 degrees warmer than this Lois. And I say that as someone who I am literally not literally because I'm recording with you right now, but these days and nights I've been rewatching Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman. And that's the thing that I'm struck by is like, yeah, there's friction between them, but you see different sides of her character. And so I think with Lois in these issues, I agree with you. There's not a lot of her. And then that becomes its own problem because she does become very one note. And I agree generally that Lois is a tricky character. It's a fine line to walk because you want her to be tough, but you don't want her to be too abrasive. And unfortunately, I feel like that's what we get here with really all of these titles, to be honest, especially during this first year that we're looking at. And I feel like the problem is compounded. We've been talking about this. Because this wasn't a hard 100% reboot where, we're starting from scratch and we're going to do just like year one and then we're going to move forward. Man of Steel covers years.
7 years.
And so the fact that even into these issues here, she is still giving him grief about snagging that first story. It just feels like, lady, you got to let this go or just don't talk to him. Like it can't, it just becomes grating at a point.
Interpersonal relationships change over the years. Another good example of this kind of, and it's really something that comics do more than anything else because of how comic book storytelling has evolved. Like when you read Jeff Johns's and Jim Lee's first 6 issues of Justice League from the New 52, they're bickering at each other. And then you jump into issue 6 and 7, and they're still having all the beef from 5 years ago. I mean, did you guys not sit down and have a conversation at any point, or work this out, or or just, just getting to know this guy and seeing that he's a pretty decent human being, and maybe you need to cut him a little slack.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, in the Adventures issues, you see her start to thaw a bit with Jose Delgado, who will become Gangbuster. Side note, with the thing that I was struck by going through these issues again, all of them, is characters who, to me, were just always there, right? Like going back and then seeing where they started, it's wild. I mean, in the pages of Superman, Maggie Sawyer, for example, and then other characters and adventures that we've been mentioning, like Gangbuster and Emil Hamilton and Cat Grant. It's like, oh yeah, like this is where they got their start. It's always kind of wild. And
Gangbuster was originally, they wanted to create a new version of the Guardian, and the editor said no, so they created Jose Delgado and Gangbuster, who's one of those characters. He's one of those characters that I call this the Monster Squad effect. There's a movie that came out in 1987 called The Monster Squad about a bunch of little kids having to fight the Universal monsters. If you were of a certain age, you know of this movie and you love this movie. If you were a little bit too old or came later, it means nothing to you. And I think Gangbuster is one of those characters for Superman. It's like, if you were of this era, you love this character. If you weren't, either he's just a character you read about or you actively don't like him for some reason.
Yeah. Fair. Yeah, I mean, like I said, he's in that group where he was just kind of always there. So to go back and see the Bibbo Babowski. Yeah, another great example. So yeah, that side of it is really interesting. And so like I said, you see Lois start to thaw a little bit with Jose in the Adventures issues. And then over in Superman, like you said, in the first issue, she's agreed to go jogging with Clark. In that two-parter with the Host, it looks like Clark might have been killed and she's concerned. So I don't know. That's something, I suppose.
But it's also setting up the Wonder Woman thing in that issue. So
yes, it's funny because like that's, to me, I don't know. And listen, you push back at me on this. If you feel like, because I'm saying like I'm not really seeing a lot of that kind of inner struggle.
No, I completely agree with you. It was one of the things about doing From Crisis to Crisis made me realize certain things about Byrne's Superman that I never thought about. One was his Lois, and two, my God, that man would just have info dumps at the end of his issues explaining everything that he didn't talk about. And it just got to a point where it's just like, when you see it again and again and again, it's just like, why didn't you pace this better?
Listen, the fact that we go from a multi-page info dump at the end of Man of Steel #6 right into a multi-page info dump at the start of Superman #1, it's like, what the hell? Come on. I mean,
but the balance of that is that you also have like a really cool new version of Metallo introduced in that issue.
Sure. But where I was going with the Lois thing is that in that Mixie issue, yes, you see a little further thawing where she had agreed to have lunch with Clark, but then of course Mxyzptlk intervenes, and then at the end, she shows up with a grocery bag to make him dinner. But exactly as you described, Kat opens the door because she's swooped in. So I mention those instances because yes, it's not like Lois doesn't have any moments, but they're few and far between. And I think it's really tough. And really looking at this first year of this era, I mean, far and away, if there's one primary romantic interest, certainly one to root for, it's Cat Grant.
Oh, absolutely. 100%. Cat. This is why, as much as I enjoy the Jeff Johns era, I really don't like his portrayal of Cat Grant. Is because this Cat Grant from the jump was very nuanced. Yes, she was a gossip columnist, and boy, Lois is very keen to point that out in the first issue of Adventures of Superman. But she's somebody that you kind of like, and then you find out her backstory, and it's like a backstory that could exist today just as easily as it did in 1986 and 1987. And she's vivacious and she's outgoing, but she's got a kid that she loves and that she's now, she wants to be in his life. And that issue that you talked about earlier, where like Superman goes to talk to her ex-husband or the father of her child. I forget if they were actually married or not. And like, that must have been weird for him, by the way, to put yourself in that dude's shoes and Superman's coming to talk to you about your custody situation.
Yeah.
But I like her, and that's why it's like I was never rooting for Lana, because God, Byrne, for somebody that liked a character, he did terrible things to her. as a character. Uh, but if you would have said, "Hey, we're going to have Cat Grant be kind of the romantic thing for a while," I think I would have been just as happy with that as of him ending up with Lois at the time.
Absolutely. There's a warmth to her. And yes, the fact that she's interested in Clark specifically, and yeah, a bit of a complicated past. And, a lot is sort of pinned on the fact that she's slept around. She's been with a lot of people. It's like, all right. But yeah, the complicated family dynamic with seeking custody. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot there. I mean, I that's the thing. That was one of the things when I finally got to this a few years ago. I was like, oh, because by the time I came into it, she had been more firmly established and was in her own mode and was in a romantic relationship with Jose Delgado. So she had her own thing. But going back, it's like, oh no, she was actually a contender here. So I really love seeing that. I don't know. I wish that had been developed further. I also wish that, like, I'm all for exploring different romantic pairings for Clark / Superman. I think that's interesting. I wish it didn't have to be, I don't know. I wish that Lois could have been more of a viable candidate, but that we also had Cat. And then I think it gets even more interesting.
Yeah. And believe me, the other contenders are, if Superman loses his memory or doesn't know it's him, he's a player, man. I mean,
yeah. And you mentioned the dream, right? At the beginning of that 2-parter with the host, where Clark's he oversleeps and he's late to work. He doesn't have time to shave. And boy, do they talk about that a lot in those issues about him not being clean shaven. But yeah, he was having this dream about Wonder Woman. So, I mean, that's at least an instance in those Byrne issues where it's like, all right, I don't know, there's some inner something that he's dealing with, even if it's just that he's horny for Wonder Woman. At least it's something.
Yeah, that's one of those subplots that would eventually lead somewhere and then go nowhere, because it really can't, because there's no way that Perez's Wonder Woman was going to end up with Byrne's Superman. I mean, that's just not feasible. But I just love the fact that it's so human. He sees her once in a fight at the end of Legends. And like, it's so, like she makes such an impression on him that he's having dreams about her months later.
Oh, I guess she just made that strong of an impression. Hey, apropos of nothing, but how does Perry White Jr. become Jerry? And how that's just not different enough. I don't know if he really wanted to distance himself, the J from Junior, but like if he really wanted to distance himself, Perry to Jerry is just not different enough.
What is Perry's middle name? Maybe can I see that? Is that in the Who's Who page that are in? I love the fact that these collections count the Who's Who page. By the way, I talk about the fact that I was kind of on my own and I didn't read any back issues. I did cheat a little bit, just to let you know, when I was a kid, because the same month that I started picking up the Superman books, Who's Who Update 87 was coming out. So I read those as well. So I wasn't completely lost in the woods, but I wonder if it was, what is Perry's middle name? This is something I should feel like I should know at this point in my stage as a Superman fan. But yeah, that's one of those things. Is I love believe me, Jerry White is again one of those characters that if you know nothing, yeah, those aren't in there. If you know nothing of this era, and you hear about Jerry White and you hear that name, it doesn't mean anything to you. But if you're a Triangle era kid, like, he's part of one of the most emotional stories from that era. So
yeah, absolutely. I want to pick your brain a little bit about the team ups in Action Comics.
Okay.
Kind of rattled off the characters that Superman interacts with. I don't know. I mean, I'm curious what sort of mileage you got out of these. Because for myself, like I said at the top, I mean, they were fun. I enjoyed them. I mean, Phantom Stranger, Etrigan, we're getting into supernatural territory, not the sweet spot for me personally. I can't explain it, but I've just never liked the Metal Men. So that was one that did nothing for me. But overall, they were fun and enjoyable, yet at the same time, and I don't want to come across overly negative in this, but I share my honest opinions. We spoke very highly a couple episodes ago about the Batman issue of Man of Steel. Because there you were seeing their first meeting, a clear point of departure from the pre-crisis dynamic between the characters. You understood why these characters interacted the way they did. You saw the ways in which they were aligned, but how their approaches differed and how that caused conflict, yet they're able to come to this understanding. Magpie aside, I felt like it really kind of hit what you would want to for this first post-crisis meeting. When I look at these action issues, I don't know. On the one hand, I think it loses a little something in that we're years into the DCU at this point. So it's like you're not necessarily seeing his first encounters. So there's kind of like this lived-in backstory that you're picking up on, which is fine. But I also don't know that many, if any of these really kind of offer any kind of meaningful insight into the characters or their dynamic. It's just kind of like they work together to solve the plot of the issue.
First, how dare you, sir? Hashtag justice for Magpie. I love Magpie.
I've softened on, honestly, I've gotten a lot more, I've lightened up on Magpie. Honestly.
I think I'm more amused that Mike Carlin and Mark Gruenwald are two of her minions in that issue more than anything else. The thing about these issues now is that I very much see this as a continuation of DC Comics Presents. I don't know how much DC Comics Presents you've ever really read.
A little bit, not much, a few issues.
So the better those stories were how interesting the pairing was and what the writer did with them. And there was a lot of different writers on that title. But when you look at this, I think it was more, looking at it now, as I think I alluded to earlier, this was more of an excuse for Byrne to play with the larger DC universe in the title. Originally, apparently, Alan Moore was supposed to write this. I want to live in that alternate universe for a couple of days,
right?
Just to read those stories, man. but you know, the Teen Titans one is okay. I guess what I would say is most of them were, as our mutual friend Rob O'Connor would say, aggressively fine. Like the new Teen Titans one is creepy on certain levels. I really don't like some of the dialogue of taking over Superman and Wonder Girl. And Superman's just kind of a jerk at the end and very ableist. You know, the Phantom Stranger issue is fine. It gave me this, between that and Legends, I had this warped perception of the Phantom Stranger is that he's just this guy that shows up and is kind of a jerk and just pulls you into situations that you don't want to be in. Legends is him teaming up with the New Gods. Byrne's a huge Kirby fan, so that makes sense. And if I am correct, and I could be wrong about this, I'd have to go back and read those Justice League of America issues from the early 80s. I think this is one of the first times Darkseid and Superman ever threw down that we see in comics. I could be wrong on that. I'm not gonna say that definitively. But then you have the Metal Men, who I like. Byrne obviously liked them as well, but that issue is just okay. The Superboy issue is part of a longer storyline, so that's an outlier. The Big Barda and the Mr. Miracle issues are just weird in every sense of the word. The Etrigan one is, again, Byrne playing with a Kirby creation, so he gets to draw the demon, and we get a Monty Python gag in the middle of it as well. And then, like, I think some of the later issues are really cool, like the ones we won't be talking about, like 495. I like the Booster Gold issue. I like the Checkmate issue is a backdoor pilot, so that's the Action is the one thing that, unless it ties into one of the other books, you could dissect from somebody's reading of this era, and I don't think they're missing anything, which is kind of sad when you really think about it.
Yeah. No, and I appreciate the rundown that you gave, and I agree. I mean, like, just as an example for people, like for the Phantom Stranger one, you have this magical artifact that lands in a prison graveyard and animates it. And so you've got this battle on two fronts where Superman is dealing with the physical side of this walking graveyard, and then Phantom Stranger is battling on the spiritual realm and condemning the souls and all of that. I think, yeah, like they're perfectly readable and enjoyable. And I think your mileage will vary depending on how interested you are in the other characters that are being brought in those pairings. I think for me, ultimately, it's just, I like this a lot better in idea than in execution, right? The notion of, oh, okay, you're going to get this tour through the post-crisis DCU, Superman teaming up with all of these characters, like that's great. But yeah, as far as that insight into the characters and their dynamic, I just didn't really feel like that was there. And I guess, yeah, that's what I would have loved to have seen. But yes, we got to talk more about this Big Barda two-parter. So out of all of these team-ups, this is the one that one issue wouldn't have been enough. We had to contain this. And this is why I'm sure, even if people haven't read this, I'm surely they have come across this or they have seen articles or Reddit threads about this. Highly controversial, but the idea is that there is this outcast from Apocalypse, Sleaze, who has set up in the seedy area of Metropolis, basically like Times Square of the 70s, 80s. Yeah.
Yeah. Before they cleaned it up.
Before they cleaned it up, before my time, but I did watch The Deuce on HBO. So I feel like I can have a good sense of what that was about. But he gets the drop on Big Barda and he is able to exert a level of mind control. And so we see Barda and she's scantily clad and being made to dance around. And then we have Darkseid taunting Mr. Miracle with a videotape of Barda. And so we see Scott and Oberon watching this. We don't see what's on the tape, but we see their reactions and they are absolutely horrified by this. Superman also gets pulled into this and is subjugated by Sleaze. And it builds to Superman and Barda sitting upright on a bed, fully clothed, for the record, made to kiss. And this is being filmed. And this is when Mr. Miracle intervenes. So as much as this is often kind of painted as Clark and Barda make a porno, yes, they were headed in that direction. But I think the implication is pretty clear. They certainly didn't get that far. The part that bothers me more is kind of what exactly was Barda made to do. There's some ambiguity there, so we can maybe just kind of live in that. But I think there are some questions to explore on that front. And then, not to make light of this, but I still cannot get past the notion of Darkseid sitting in a living room holding a VHS.
So here's the funny thing. On that, it's interesting that you have that. That sounds pretentious. I apologize. I'm fascinated by people's reactions to Darkseid because nowadays Darkseid is. I think the general perception everybody has is what we saw in like the Superman the Animated Series, and even to a certain extent what we saw in Zack Snyder's Justice League. Is like he's just he's this looming figure. Jack, that shot of him sitting in a thing is Byrne lifting a Kirby image. Gotcha. Because there was an issue where somebody comes home and Darkseid's just sitting on your in your living room. I'm trying to figure out how to say this in the nicest way possible. Byrne is weird. If you look at Byrne's entire comic book output, there are some serious, questionable things that he has done in books that make you really want Benson and Stabler to maybe kick in the door at some point. The fact that he put Barda in a porno at all is just completely unnecessary. There is no artistic value to this. There is no story value to this. This entire story does not need to happen. There is nothing that happens within these two issues that is integral to Big Barda, Mr. Miracle, Darkseid, or Superman. The only thing that I can say even positive is that this is where we first see Sleaze, and Sleaze is involved with bringing the Guardian and the Newsboy Legion into the Superman books in the post-crisis era. I, for the longest time, would argue with people that they didn't make a porno. Nowadays, I'm just like, no, none of this is good. There is no good side of this argument at all. It's just weird. Like, we get bitch at Jeff Johns and other modern creators for doing things in the books, and this is what Byrne was doing in 1987.
Yeah. So So first of all, no, your point is well taken about Darkseid. While I have not yet immersed myself in the Jack Kirby material, yes, I am aware that the kind of the more modern take on Darkseid is not what Darkseid has always been. But I still can never get past that image of him in the living room.
My point on that is I see why you think that's so weird, because if your entire perception of the character is the looming guy, then him in this very mundane situation, it'd be like opening your bathroom and Superman sitting on the can. I mean, you don't think of that.
I think even more so than the setting, it's the tape. It's like the fact that he even has a conception of VHS is like, whoa, okay. But no, I agree with you. And I mean, not to get too mired in the details here, but in terms of like what the intention was, there is that scene with Sleaze where we see Barda dancing scantily for him. And then he approaches her, and it's a very dark moment where she's like, no, like he's going to make her do something. And she's like, not again. I don't know, most generous reading of this is that the video is of her dancing. But I think the fact that that scene between them alluded to something worse and darker leads me to think that there was something worse on that tape. All to say that I agree with you. It's like, it's in terms of what function it serves in terms of story or character, it really doesn't. I mean, this isn't something that is ultimately unpacked in any way, at least not here. And with Superman and Barda, I agree with you. Now, if we have to battle on this, I'm by your side. That no, I don't think Clark and Barda actually make a porno. But even the fact that they are made to be in that situation and engage in that kiss against their will, that's a violation. And like I said, if it's something that's going to lead to any kind of character development or discussion, anything, but it's so quickly brushed aside and they part ways and that's it. And so it really seems to be for that shock value or because of whatever predilections the creator has. I don't know. You get that striking cover of the two of them kissing and it's like, whoa, what's going on there? But yeah, it's very hard to justify this, and 2 issues no less.
Yeah. Like we had to do this. Like this story was so important, 1 issue could not contain everything that was going on, and it's just like what? It's like sometimes when I think newer readers today going back to these and they like have these reactions, it's one of the few times where I'm like, no, dude, you're absolutely right. Everything you're feeling right now is something that we just didn't talk about at the time because it was weird then, but it wasn't like as weird. I guess it was just more socially, culturally acceptable, but it's the hardest ones to go through in this reread. The action, I have to say, the actions are the ones where I skim the most. In certain, especially when I was reading it through for this, it's like I've read these so many times that I don't have to like dial. And then we weren't doing a dissection of it. It's just like, it's almost like where it's just like, I would almost prefer something like the Hawkman, where it's part of an entirely different storyline that has nothing to do with Superman. I would prefer that than this.
Yeah, I think that one's like the conclusion of Shadow War. I didn't read the beginning of Shadow War, but screw it, man. I'll read that. That's fine. He's helping the Hawks in space. They get tossed around hyperspace. He ends up with the Green Lantern.
Green Lantern, and I will have to say, of all of the crossover, of all the team ups, I think the Green Lantern Corps is the most fun.
Sure,
and I think that's just because Byrne seems to be having a lot of fun playing with the Green Lanterns themselves. And it does stem from the Hawkman issue. So you have that.
Yes.
But
yeah.
It's still a really, it's a fun story. It's what these things I think were supposed to be more than what they were.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That landmass, that prison graveyard that Superman hurled into space at the end of the Phantom Stranger issue ends up coming back around, and they end up killing 2 birds with 1 stone and using that as the home for these worm-like creatures that the Green Lantern Corps have saved. Yeah, that's an instance where, okay, we're tying some things together. They're fun. The last thing I guess I had on the Action Comics front, and more on a positive or at least neutral note, I suppose, is that, it's interesting just to keep in mind, like we're now in this post-crisis landscape where the JSA has been folded into the continuity of this new Earth. So it's not that Superman was the first superhero ever, but rather the world had known about these prior costume crime fighters. And even the notion of Superman being an alien which comes out in Superman #1 by Byrne in that battle with Metallo. Even there, and in other issues, there's reference to the fact that, it's known that there are other aliens throughout the DC universe that have made their way to Earth. So just interesting to kind of clock that context in terms of where the continuity is at the moment.
Yeah, there is no grand, like, are you an alien? Or should we be afraid of that in these issues? Which is nice. Having lived through the Checks Notes last 20 years of Superman in media.
Hey.
Oh, hey, Jeff.
What's going on, guys?
Oh, talking about Superman.
Oh, cool. I could talk about Superman.
I could talk some more about Superman.
We know.
I'll bet a few people would want to get in on this.
I'm down.
You know it.
That sounds like fun. I'll do it.
Cool, let's do it. We can call the show Men of Steel.
And you can find it at certainpov.com.
Or wherever you get your podcasts.
Yay.
As a Superman fan, have you ever wondered what would happen if a person who knew barely anything about comics decided to absorb hundreds of Superman stories from all eras and media? Robbo is that kind of person, and that's exactly what he's done on a new show called This Podcast Will Never Die. The first season, called Superman Will Never Die, starts with all the unexpected ways the Man of Steel stood out from the pulp heroes on the newsstands in 1938. Listen and subscribe to This Podcast Will Never Die, and you'll never look at Superman's trunks the same way again. We love digging into epic comic book runs, but what about the art of the single issue? Single Bound is a new podcast series hosted by married couple Amy and Logan as they review single issues of comics. And if the title also makes you think of Superman, you're not alone, as the Man of Steel is Logan's favorite character and a regular topic of discussion on Single Bound. Listen and subscribe on Spotify and YouTube, and follow the show on Instagram at Single Bound Podcast. But Lex, I kind of, we talked about a few of these key instances with Lex, but let me ask you first, though, just big picture, this iteration of the character, the way he comes across, the way he's depicted in these issues, does this resonate with you?
Yes, it does. I like this Lex mainly because he is an out and out villain, but he's kind of magnetic at the same time. So it's not like you're repulsed by him. I love the fact that he hears somebody is about to kill Superman in Superman #1. And he's like, this won't stand. If anyone's going to kill that alien, it's going to be me. And then the whole thing with Amanda McCoy in the second issue, where he finds out that Superman and Clark are the same person, and his ego just won't let him believe that. He can't. He is just so, for being so intelligent, he is so single-minded in his worldview that he cannot imagine a man of such power would ever pretend to not be that. And we go to Metropolis 900 Miles, which is one of the most cited references of this Lex, is that he's just playing with this poor waitress who tries to shoot him later. And the thing that's weird about that is she's wearing the same uniform, which is weird when you look at that issue from around the time of President Lex.
So she shows was stuck up in that life.
Yeah, apparently. You think that if she was traveling to Metropolis, she would have changed clothes, but maybe, whatever. But, and then you have the Clash story where he's put this armored thing into play to turn to have people afraid of Superman. And then Maggie Sawyer gets in his face at the end, and then Maggie Sawyer's on his radar. I like this version. This is the version of the character that I first really kind of fell in love with in terms of Lex. And this is what I judge other versions. I think other writers did better with it, but I really like the foundation that Byrne lays with him in these issues.
Right on. Yeah, I definitely adhere to the evil businessman model. Though it is interesting, it comes up in some of these issues here, and I know Byrne and or Wolfman talked about how it's not that this Lex has no scientific background.
Yeah.
He's more like Walt Disney, who wasn't at the drawing table much after he became the head of the company. So, and there are specific instances where Lex talks about getting back in the lab or something like that. but they do make that point.
No, I agree. I always got the sense that him getting his hands dirty was in the past and stuff that we never saw. It's like, I think if I'm remembering correctly, he created the Lex Wing 1 or something like that. And that's what launched LexCorp as a company. And it's just grown and grown and grown. And now a certain percentage of Metropolis works for him directly or indirectly in some ways. And there is a part of me that thinks that you lose something with that, but at the same time, it was my first main exposure to Lex in the comics. And what was my other main exposure to Lex before that? It was the Superman films. And what was he in that? He was smart, but he was getting his hands dirty by, going around and reprogramming missiles. But I never got the sense that he was this mad scientist genius. It's just he just has people to do that for him now. So he's thinking big picture.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, I mean, I definitely adhere to the evil businessman model. I like the calculation. I like how he's one step ahead. I mean, like that moment with Maggie and Superman at the end of that Overload issue was great. I liked seeing that Maggie saw through him, right? That this facade of his doesn't work on everybody. But how he's still ultimately able to skate by. And there's always some believable cover story, even going over to the Wolfman issues, the business about this gang cleanup program that he's involved in that's actually recruiting them and testing them. But the public cover of it is something that people buy. So all of that, and even the business with Lois and the manipulation about the treatment for her mother, like all of that to me, I think feels like Lex. I think for me, when we get into kind of the more unsavory sexual side of things, like we talked about the World of Metropolis miniseries, where he's treating himself to the video surveillance of a 15-year-old Lois being strip searched. It's like, I could do without that. The 900 Mile story, like I said, it's very effective for capturing this version of Lex. I guess my ideal version of the character wouldn't spend his time with something quite so petty, but it's like it really makes a statement about the character. Like I get why it's so striking to people. I guess that's where it loses me a little bit.
No, that's fair, and especially when you came into the comics. Lex Luthor was the clone was posing as his own son.
Yeah, he had an Australian accent. Never knew it because they stopped talking about it by that point. So
yeah, they did not. They did not. You have to go to the Dirk Maggs thing, which I do want to ask. Have you ever listened to the?
Yes, I loved it. It was great. Yeah.
Yeah. So that kind of yeah. So anyways, no, but I see where you're coming from, because I think you were talking earlier about how you have to go 180 degrees in one direction to kind of get back to a sense of equilibrium. Like, and I kind of feel like even in like the movies from the past 20 years, like we had Superman Returns, which was one direction, and then we had Man of Steel, which was 180 degrees in the other direction, and now we're kind of swung back to the middle almost, where I think this version of Lex was needed so that later versions of the character could be more nuanced, where people could come along. I mean, when you look at like Birthright, one of my problems with Birthright, both when I first read it and when I reread it years later, is I don't like the idea of Lex forming all of his technology by reverse engineering alien technology. I think that takes away. It shows that the character is smart, but it takes away innovation, if that makes any sense. So I think really, like, you need this version of Lex to get to the ideal version of Lex, but I totally see where you're coming from. And I can even agree with you to a certain extent on that, like on a conceptual level, where you're coming from with that. That does make a lot of sense.
But no, I mean, it's a very engrossing story when he's making this proposal to Jenny Hubbard to spend a month with him in Metropolis for $1 million, and gives her 10 minutes to decide. And everybody's saying, "Are you going to do it? Are you going to do it?" And then he leaves. Yeah. So to see him toy with her, it's funny because I guess the way I always talk about it, and I know the audience knows this, about kind of always longing for some sort of humanity in the character or redemption. But I mean, to be more specific, I think for me it's more just the potential for humanity, the potential for redemption. And I think a little bit of that push-pull with Lex goes a long way for me. So like when we do get deeper into this era of the comics, and spoiler alert, we do have the death of Jerry White, who is the biological son of Lex. And there's something that registers with Lex when that happens. And it's like, oh, okay, like there's something here. And so I think just having a little bit of that push pull with the character where, oh, maybe there's nuance is a perfect word for it. That's what I love when we get to that point. And here we're not, but I agree. I think it is part of this overall arc and calibration.
But to agree with you, while the character is rich, he is kind of one note in these comics. He is only evil. There is no sense of like what Jeff Johns would do of playing up the idea of like, if Superman wasn't here, I could have been greater. Right. You know, this guy is just, I think this guy is more of a representation of what an evil billionaire would be. In all honesty.
Yeah, like Superman pulled focus. This was Lex's city. Superman pulled focus, and Superman can't be bought, right? Because the whole thing with Lex and Jenny is this whole idea of, in his experience, everyone is that kind of girl. Like everyone has a price. Everyone can be bought. Yet he's now encountered the one person who can't. And
he can't, and he's the one that had him arrested, him at the direction of Mayor Berkowitz. He is the one that now people look up to. And, you know, I love the fact that without this version, you don't get John Shays, but John Shays Lex Luthor is a little more nuanced and interesting.
Yeah, and there's a charisma to that character. Yeah. And there has to be. I mean, we're going to be getting to this very soon, but it's like to build a version of the character where it's even remotely plausible that Lois would entertain him as a romantic suitor. There has to be something else there. Mm-hmm. So yes, I'm glad we got that. But yeah, how do I put? Because I know, and I know, well, I'll hear from people, and that's fine. And I want to hear what people think about these issues. And I know, as always, we get a range of reactions, and I'm sure there will be some people who agree with us, some people who really don't get as much out of these issues. Maybe they're really not fans. And then there are people who, really kind of swear by these and will probably disagree with any of the critiques that we've raised. But I think for me, I do keep coming back to this idea of the foundation. Like I like the building blocks that were laid here, because I know, the audience knows what we're going to get.
Yeah. As
we get deeper into these stories, as we get into the Triangle era. So I appreciate the foundation that's laid here, but yeah, there is a lot that is one note, but at the same time, I don't know, how do I put this? I guess I say it more to acknowledge it, and it's part of the experience that I'm having reading it. It's not necessarily like I'm dumping on these things, because arguably it's an important part of the process to get to those stories.
No, more to the point, it's just you can like something and still have problems with it. And like there is a very different experience of reading these month to month over decades and reading them all at once in a collected edition in kind of a way they weren't meant to be read.
True.
In a large extent. So it's like one of those things where sometimes I'll hear newer readers say something and I'm just like, you just don't understand. But then there's times where I'm like, you're doing this in a completely different way than I did, so your reaction to it is going to be yours and just as valid. So when you look at this first year of the post-crisis Superman, it is up and down. And there are really good points and there are really low points. And there are points where Jeff and I would make the joke that From Crisis to Crisis listeners still mention to this day of mummy rocket boots. I mean, that's just one of those things where it's and what I like to say is have learning will travel. I don't know why that makes me laugh when I think of it, because of just those. I hate alien names that are just regular words with apostrophes where for absolutely no reason. But when you look at this first year, it's one of those things that was, like we said at the beginning, it was completely necessary for the time. It's completely foundational. taken on their own, a lot of the stories are very entertaining, but when you look at it big picture, you start to see where the seams are coming apart and where things could have been a little more layered and nuanced, but weren't. And it took future creators to make that leap.
Well, yeah, well said. And I think that's the thing. It was pretty deep into the reading where it really clicked for me, because I'm like, what am I missing here? But I think having those Wolfman Ordway issues as the point of contrast really did help solidify, because I just felt like, okay, we are getting that character development. It feels like we are building out this world, the supporting cast, this little corner of Metropolis with Suicide Slum. It just feels like we're kind of building towards something. Whereas the Byrne issues in both Action and Superman just felt a lot more piecemeal. Like they were just these kind of one-offs, and it just didn't feel like they were about anything in as substantial a way.
Which is why the second year, to a large extent, is not as diverse as the first year, because you only have one guy writing the 3 and then 2 titles.
Yeah.
So you don't have a different perspective. You have Ordway contributing to plot ideas a little more, but you still have Byrne as the creative head of this character, and so you can't go to Adventures as your refuge for a different perspective, because he's just kind of doing the same things there as he is in this.
Yeah. Well, I'll complain about that next week, but as I reread all of that, but on the Lex note, I do have to say, I loved, like we said at the top, not a ton of coordination. We weren't yet in the Triangle era, but I did like how you get the end of that Action issue where Lex is making this connection, and then you see that payoff in Superman #2. And I do think it is a great Lex issue. I love that they addressed the connection between Clark and Superman as head on and as early as they did. And I agree with you. By the time you get to the end of the issue and the computer has processed all of this data about Clark and Superman and has come to the only logical conclusion, the correct one, that Clark is Superman, the idea is so antithetical to Lex. He cannot fathom a scenario where someone with the powers of a god would pose as an ordinary human, and he just rejects this outright. That's an instance where I'm like, oh man, that's Lex. Like that felt spot on to me. But yes, along the way, we have Lex's goons tranking Jonathan and Martha and ransacking the Kent house, stealing Martha's scrapbook, which will then later get sent to Clark. We'll have more on that
Superman
to come.
#5, and then then that goes to Batman.
But yeah, we do have the abduction and torture of Lana Lang, and a pretty gnarly scene where Clark comes back to his apartment and he sees the bloody footprints in the hallway, and he finds her in the supply closet, and she's just an absolute mess. What I appreciate about what that leads to is that we have this confrontation with Superman and Lex has the kryptonite ring, and he's able to keep Superman at bay. And this is yet another instance of Superman not being able to prove that Lex has done what he knows Lex has done. So I really like that dynamic. I think that's this era and what we love to see. But yeah, it's unfortunate that Lana had to be put through that, and to really just sort of be that object or that device. Yeah,
it's not as bad as what he would continue to do with Lana through the second year. The thing that struck me when I saw him bursting into Lex's office at the end of Superman 2, #2, is just like, well, I was led to believe by the social media that Superman never would do that kind of thing as he did in the movie. But here we are. And this isn't over a kidnapped dog. This is his best friend and first love has been kidnapped and tortured by this man. I think Superman showed amazing restraint in that scene.
So actually, that's a perfect segue, because I have just a few more kind of big picture questions for you, and then I'll let you go. But that's one of the things that I've been kicking around is the extent to which the characterization of Superman that we see here is reflected in the most recent movie. Because I know you've seen a ton of reactions to this and people talking about the various influences that you see. And I mean, you cited a perfect example of Superman doing in the comics something very close to what he does in the movie. But I guess in terms of the kind of the larger characterization, I don't really see the Byrne Superman in the David Cornsweet version.
No, not at all. And it's interesting. The David Corenswet Superman is very much a modern version of the pre-crisis Superman. It's very much that kind of Grant Morrison. I don't want to say it's like the Grant Morrison one, because the Grant Morrison one was more aloof. And I think it's just because it's just David Corenswet's a magnetic actor. He can't be aloof. But there is no... You see seeds of different aspects of Byrne's reinvention of the character, but not in Superman himself in the movie. Because the Superman of these comics is just a modern version of what Jerry and Joe did. You know, he is dealing with big picture things, but he's doing it in a kind of a more of a street level way, if that makes any sense. Like, and the fact that he is depowered, like when he goes up against Joker, for example, and he is hit by a nuclear, several megaton nuclear device, it knocks him out. Like, there's that great scene where he tries to fly and he just falls flat on his face, literally.
Yeah.
And I like that. That is my preferred take on Superman. I don't like omnipotent Superman. And it's totally the fault of John Byrne that that's the case.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think, yeah, in terms of some of those trappings, yes, but in terms of more of that personality and characterization, I don't know. I don't really.
No, this Superman is very much, if you're going to say, is that like the George Reeves version of Superman, I would actually say, yeah, more, especially first season, George Reeves, but more also going back to the scrappier version of the very early Siegel and Schuster issues as well. So just dealing with bigger picture things, because that's where we are in his career. And
not so much a social crusader for the oppressed.
No, but no. That, I think there's a story to be told there, but still.
Yeah. A couple of other things. So, you know, again, we've really, I think, given a thorough rundown of kind of what's going on in these issues. And one of the things that people might have clued into is that, yes, we have an appearance by Mxyzptlk and Joker and Metallo, and of course Lex is at play. But largely we're dealing with newer or more obscure villains, like we said, Host and the Circle, the Stratos guy who claims to be
who did god. Come back.
When does he come? I forget.
In the Roger Stern Never-Ending Battle novel from the early 2000s, okay. Stratos makes an appearance.
Stratos, yeah. I guess, do you like that approach of not just kind of tossing all of the familiar faces at us?
At the time, I didn't care. Years ago, when I reread them, I was just like, okay, I can kind of see. I think two of the criticisms that Byrne faced when he did this was throwing the baby out with the bathwater in terms of getting rid of all of what DC called the barnacles that accumulated on Superman's hull. And also his version of Krypton. Those were like the two biggest problems that people seem to have. And I think if you look at DC Comics just in general in the post-crisis era, I've been thinking about this a lot in the past couple of days because I was looking at like some older books like Green Arrow and Flash from that era. The entire ethos of DC was moving forward and doing new things. So if you look at like these books in terms of the culture of DC Comics at the time, that fits perfectly. Is that my preferred way of doing it? No, and the reason is that, again, we were talking earlier about how we go from Man of Steel #1 to Man of Steel #6. That's a 7-year gap. And now we're going forward from Man of Steel #6 into the new books. But he's never fought Brainiac. He's never faced Mister Mxyzptlk. We're reintroduced to all of his rogues gallery 7 years into his career. And that feels weird. Now, you don't want to have him like fighting Brainiac and then having to do like an extended flashback, but Clash, I mean, that's Superman number 10's a banger of an issue. Don't get me wrong. There's a lot of really cool stuff in there. But Clash is not a heavy hitter in terms of Superman's rogues gallery. The Host is not a heavy. It's like to me, to a certain extent, the Host was only there so that Roger Stern could use them to get Superman bumped forward in time during Time and Time Again. I mean,
yeah.
So, and Rampage was okay. I'm going to do She-Hulk, but in the DC universe. So yeah, that is the one area where Byrne did not excel. Is like he put him up against villains and interesting threats, but none of them had any staying power at all.
Yeah, and also, you know, and Mike Carlin talked about this, that, and this has come up in other interviews too, that like this was they saw this as an opportunity to show you the first meeting between Superman and Mxyzptlk, and the first meeting between Superman and Metallo in this era. But yeah, because this wasn't allowed to be that full on reboot starting from scratch, we have to catch him up to the present day DCU years in. Yeah, you're left with that choice.
Who's he been fighting this entire time?
Yeah, I know. I mean, that's a good, yeah. Well, hey, you know what? They were big fans of the Reeves series, so maybe those are the kinds of threats he was dealing with.
Lots of guys in pork pie hats and in sedans.
Yeah, I mean, these generic gangsters. I mean, I don't know, but because I mean, I think then that ultimately that's the trade-off, right? It's like, we can make it that he's faced them before, and then you have to fill in the backstory, and you're not seeing the first meeting, or you are seeing the first meeting, but where where have these guys been all these years? Who has he been fighting? So,
and what that falls under is questions we're not supposed to ask. Those are what Alfred Hitchcock would refer to as refrigerator questions. Is that nothing you have while you're reading it, but later that night when you're going to the refrigerator for a snack, suddenly you're like, wait a second.
I guess to kind of bring us full circle, we started by talking about how you got into Superman comics essentially with those chapters of the greatest hero of them all. And I will say we did a whole episode or half of a whole episode on this storyline last year when we covered Superboy. So if people want like a full discussion of this, it's there. But yeah, the greatest hero of them all was this 4-part crossover, Superman, Action, and 2 issues of Legion of Superheroes written by Paul Levitz, that had to reconcile the pre and post continuity of the Legion of Superheroes in this new landscape where Clark was never Superboy. And the solution was that the Time Trapper had created this pocket universe, which contained Superboy and sort of the classic pre-crisis iteration of Smallville and that's that whole world. I just had current Superman writer Josh Williamson on the podcast, and we're in the current mode at DC Comics where Clark is Superboy. We're seeing those stories unfold in Action Comics. And Josh talked about how when you take Superboy away, it just kind of fundamentally breaks something. I'm just curious your overall thoughts on the Superboy of it all, and specifically the solution that is reached here.
So because this is where I came in, it just was accepted fact in my head. And that's foundational for me. Coming to it later, I see how flawed an idea it was. Like, they're like, we're going to get rid of Superboy. Okay, that fundamentally breaks the Legion of Superheroes for decades, just in terms of how they come in. And I know Byrne wanted to do a Superboy series so he could like show Superman learning the ropes, which is interesting. But they had to explain it somehow. And to me, because so much of my history and my career as a Superman fan, he wasn't Superboy. I accept it that they're like over the last, good God, 20 years now, been trying to sprinkle him back into the backstory, and now it's like official. Where I'm like, okay, that's fine, that's cool. Let's play with this for a little while. It will always be on some level weird to me because I like Superboy stories that I've read. And there are large chunks of different eras, like the New Adventures of Superman that Gary Bates wrote.
Yeah, that was
Paul
great.
Kupperberg issues. I like those books, and I like the idea of Superboy. But I'm going to be completely honest with you. Bottom line, I kind of prefer him not being Superboy, in all honesty. And that's just where I am. And it's all Byrne and Levitz's fault because they did those stories. It's funny. I'm introduced. This is also why you would think that, when you're introduced to stuff, like you see something like, ooh, that's cool, I want to go check that out. Like, that didn't happen with the Legion. Like, like for whatever reason, I got to the end of that Action Comics issue, and I'm like, oh, okay, well, they're gonna go off and do that. I'm just gonna continue with Superboy. I have no, and because of that, the Legion has always been this thing that has always been I've kept at arm's reach for some reason. Like, I get their ethos and I get what their things, but it's like Superboy. It's just like, it's not part of my conception of the character. I don't begrudge anybody that feels differently. You went on a journey last year learning about it. So, but asking you on the other side of that, do you still prefer him to not be Superboy?
Yeah, I mean, and I've said versions of this, but it's as good a time as any to sort of circle back to the idea. Yeah, I mean, if I could only have one version of the character's backstory, would I want him to be Superboy? No, probably not. But I definitely see the value in a version of the story where he is. I mean, I think ultimately what it comes down to for me is Clark has to learn how to become Superman somehow.
Yeah.
And that could be without a costume getting put through this gauntlet over 10 years in Smallville. It could be traveling the world, as we've seen it in Birthright and the post-crisis iteration where he's traveling and he's having these experiences. It can be as Superboy. So there are various ways for him to learn to become Superman. And so I'm open to different depictions. Yeah, my heart still does ultimately lie with this iteration where he doesn't don the costume until he reaches adulthood and there's kind of that moment of being revealed to the world. But I'm definitely open to it. I don't think doing away with Superboy fundamentally has to break something with Clark's story. Yeah. I do see the problem that it poses for the Legion. It's funny though. So when I had my Carlin here, I said, I was like, what were some of the other ideas that were bandied about to sort of fix this, so to speak? Was there any thought of just making it a young Superman who had these adventures with the Legion and a young Superman who inspired them, right? So he wasn't technically Superboy. And Mike was like, yeah, like that probably would have been the easy way to do it. He goes, but we wouldn't have had a story, right? So they came up with this whole idea of the time trapper in the pocket universe. And of course that will pay off next week when we talk about the Supergirl saga and everything that leads to. And the Superboy of this pocket universe does ultimately make the ultimate sacrifice and he's mourned by the Legion. I guess, and I don't know if this is something you can specifically speak to when maybe one of our diehard Legion audience members will chime in. I guess once we had this fix of, yeah, they had adventures with a Clark Kent Superboy. They were inspired by him. When they were traveling back in time, they were actually traveling to this pocket universe. They weren't traveling to the past of their own Earth, but they were still encountering the Superboy. So there was a patch on the continuity in the form of this pocket universe. I don't know, like, why did this continue to throw Legion continuity into such disarray?
So if I had to take a guess on that, it would have to do with the next series of Legion after the one that this crossed over with, which was the 5 year later Legion by Keith Giffen and the Beer Bombs. There is a Wizard article that is buried in a box somewhere in this house that has an interview with Keith Giffen where he talks about the utter nightmare it was dealing with the Superman office while working on the Legion. And there's some disparity there because at the same time you had the Legion appearing in time and time again, but that was in the Dan Jurgens issues. Dan Jurgens had a history with the Legion, whatever. And something happens at the end of Time and Time Again that affects the Legion books going forward until 0 Hour. And he talks about that he got so frustrated that basically he rebooted the Legion within the first issues of his 5 year later thing to have it where Superboy wasn't a part of it at all. There never was a pocket universe, despite the fact that it does come back during 0 Hour. And Largand, who would become Valor, he's the Superboy of
Right.
that the Legion is inspired by. And then you have 0 Hour coming along, and once again, who is their hero? Who is the one they look for, are inspired by? It's Largand, who eventually comes to the future to be with them. So it's one of those things where it's kind of like where, I don't know, you're a homeowner, you can probably get to this, where you put a patch on something in your house, but it doesn't quite fix it, so you have to do something else, and you have to do something else, and ultimately it just makes everything worse with what you're working with.
I hear you. No,
and I think that's what happened with the Legion.
No, I appreciate your insight. One of these years we'll do a dedicated Legion event, and I'll dive into all of this. But
oh, you're gonna love the Great Darkness Saga. I know you're gonna love that. It's such a good story.
Yeah,
it really is. But yeah, I've read a lot of the post 0 Hour stuff, and like it was a big deal when they had the crossover with the man who would become known as Connell and all that. But yeah, it kept being a problem because they kept breaking it, essentially.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, that really kind of answers my question. Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. Again, we'll have more to say on that front way down the line. And in the meantime, I know we have some folks who are really steeped in Legion lore, and, of course, please feel free to reach out, but it's interesting. And it's funny, that crossover, and especially the two, the issue of Superman in action, where, you have this battle between Superboy and Superman, and, Superman sees the Smallville of this pocket universe, and it really drives home the contrast between the pre and post crisis versions. And of course, much is made about the power level of Superboy. He's so much stronger. He can break the time barrier on his own. The post crisis Superman can't. And it's one of those things where clearly it worked for you as a kid. You weren't thrown by it, but I don't know, I could see someone maybe being confused by this. I could see a diehard pre-crisis fan, this like rubbing salt in the wound to have something like this. I don't know. But I look at something like this now with this perspective at this point in time, and I don't know. It's just kind of an interesting encapsulation of this moment in the continuity and this shift that we were undergoing with the character, to have such a pointed contrast, to actually have the two versions together, and to really just drive home this point. Like, no, this Superman was never Superboy. Yeah, so I don't know. It's just kind of striking, and I do enjoy the story, and I definitely get a lot more out of it now than I did ever before.
I'm still just stuck on the idea that was my introduction. Like, it wasn't. Oh, to be fair, this is a funny story. It could have been Man of Steel #1. In the summer of '86, I was at a farmer's market with my dad. And we were about to move from Mountaintop back to the Allentown area, Pennsylvania. And I went over to the little comic rack that they had, and I see this Superman book, and I'm leafing through it. I'm like, I'm seeing Krypton, and I'm seeing Superman. I was like, oh, they're just retelling the origin. No, I want Transformers #21, because that is the first comic book appearance of the aerial bots. So I put Man of Steel #1 back on the rack and got Transformers #21, which was edited by Mike Carlin.
All right. It all comes back around. That's amazing. Listen, I really enjoyed this conversation. I always love getting your perspective, your insight on this. I know you've spent a lot of time reading, studying, discussing all of this. So it's always a blast. Is there anything we didn't talk about with these issues that you want to, that we should?
No, we covered everything. It's just the problem with me in this era is that I could literally spend hours talking about it, because I have. And, we didn't talk about the Legends crossover and him having sex with Amazing Grace. And that costume that he wore, which was really, really weird. We didn't talk about that, but it's not really like, that's a fun footnote. That's not like an important part of this run.
Legends I don't know. I might do something with Legends at some point in the future. I don't know. I've never read the crossover in full, so that might be something for down the line. We'll see.
Back in 2016 for the 30th anniversary, me and I got a bunch of other podcasters, and I covered every single issue of the thing in like it was like 3 or 4 episodes. It's like 7 hours worth of audio. You can't find it on Spotify because I did way too many needle drops during it, because that was the bad old days where you could do that and it wasn't a problem like it is now. But I'd recommend it. It's interesting. There are some you could definitely skip.
I would do like one episode, because I think an omnibus is coming out. I think it's been solicited, so I maybe do like an episode on that.
Everything's getting an omnibus. I mean,
but I have to say that outfit that he wears on Apocalypse, it I don't know, it gave me a little bit of Hunter Prey vibes, a little bit. Yeah, just a little more frillier, because it had like had those things. No, I really appreciate you asking me to be part of this, and I mean that. I'm not just trying to wax your car here. I was a little embarrassed back when you did your From Crisis to Marriage, because somebody on one of the things is like, are you going to have Michael or Jeffrey on? And I'm like, oh, guys, don't. He's doing his. He doesn't even know who I am. So yeah, we hadn't connected at that point.
Yeah, we had not connected at that point. And I remember seeing you do it, and my first reaction was, oh, good. Somebody's covering it besides us, because I'm not precious about it. It's not like I covered it so no one else can. And again, I did that back in 2009, which, if math is my friend at this point, that is 16 years ago. So at the time it was well over a decade. But now that we get to circle back to it, and you did have me be a part of it, I really do appreciate that. It's been a lot of fun.
Oh, no, of course. I'm honored to have you here, and I'm so glad that we connected. And I appreciate you not being precious about it. And I think the thing, too, that, and I've been in that position, too, where like I've covered something and then another podcast will do it. It's like we all come at it from our own perspectives. And like you said, I mean, you went through it month by month. We did these huge swaths of issues. So
yeah, and it's just and that, again, is kind of like podcasting in a microcosm, because read through shows were very common at that time period, because it was just like, oh, we have all this time to do it. And again, you keep saying I that you have respect for the way we did it, and I appreciate that. But on the other hand, it's like, as I said, I would never do that again. I would never, if I ever did another read through show, it would be in chunks. It wouldn't be issue by issue by issue, because it takes so long to get through the material. And there are some months when there's just not a whole lot to talk about.
Yeah, no, I hear
honesty.
Well, listen, on the podcasting front, what do you want to share with folks about what you have going on?
This point, Bailey's Batman Podcast is back as a monthly kind of reading journal, as I just am connecting with Batman a little bit more, and giving him a little more attention. But I'm still doing Overlook Dark Knight with Andy, where we talk about stuff that not a lot of people talk about. More recently, we did a episode about the 85th anniversary of Robin. So we talked about our favorite Robin stories, which was a lot of fun. I am wrapping up It All Comes Back to Superman for the moment. I have about 4 episodes of Dragon Con panels to put out. I've got to finish up Moving Kryptonian Images, and there's a couple other episodes that I have planned, but by the year, that's pretty much going to go away for a little while. I may come back and do specials as I can, but there's still like a bunch of episodes to listen to, and you can still find From Crisis to Crisis on Apple Podcasts and all that. It's there. Please excuse our worldview from 16 years ago sometimes.
No, it's all good. I encourage everyone to check that out. I'll include the link to the Fortress of Baileytude in the show notes. People can check that out. Yes. Everything's there. But thank you so much. Thank you, audience. Make sure you come back next week for the grand finale to our John Byrne event, as we look through the second and final year of the Byrne era on the main titles. Until then, as always, it's about what you do. It's about action. This podcast is an affiliate of BCW Supplies. The next time you need to restock on comic book bags, boards, boxes, and more, be sure to use promo code FSP to save 10% on your order. That's FSP for Flat Squirrel Productions. It helps support the show too. Thank you. By popular demand, Digging for Kryptonite merch is now available at our TeePublic store. Visit the link in the show notes to get your DFK shirts, hats, mugs, and more. Support the show and receive exclusive content, including the spin-off podcast Beyond Metropolis, by becoming a member at patreon.com/Anthony Desiato. My sincere thanks to all patrons. Please subscribe, rate, and review today via your platform of choice, and continue the conversation by joining us on social media. Flat Squirrel Podcast is also home to another exciting episode in the Adventures of Superman, now covering the color era of the classic George Reeves series. Subscribe today. Digging for Kryptonite is a Flat Squirrel production. Key art by Isaiah Simmons and theme music by Dan Pritchard.